figured out something yesterday, and I don't mean this in any bad way. I am a connoisseur of mixed nuts.
That's why you like this class.
If I go to a buffet or someplace where they have stuff, I'll always my eye will fall to where the mixed nuts are, and I don't know where they came from yesterday, but somebody had the best mixed nuts in town I've ever seen in all my life, and I helped myself to those. Now, please, one time, many years ago in a church, I used as an illustration my affection for maraschino cherries, and the next week in a collection plate there were about 5 jars of maraschino cherries. I don't need that, mixed nuts. But you know one thing I thought about, Charles, I thought about, we're all the time talking about branding and how we can capture a certain brand. I think that that should become the brand for the Morgan Sunday School class, the best mixed nuts in town.
Okay. Put that on the letterhead.
That needs to be on our letterhead. But thank you all very much for everything that you did this week, and for those special ones of you all that led that effort, that really was a big, nice deal. So thank you all very much for that. I hope you'll think as much about this as I have. I grew up going to sleep at night with late night television hosts. That's the way I've ended my day for ages. Some of you are like me. You can go all the way back to Jack Parr and Steve Allen. Anybody go back that far?
Oh, yes.
Now, Susan. Well, you've held up better than I have. but at any rate, then when Phyllis and I got married, we spent 25 or 30 years, however long it was, on Johnny Carson. And then when Johnny left, which seemed like a really hard thing to overcome, David Letterman kind of took his place, and we loved David Letterman. Had a chance to see him 3 times in person, and then I figured when Dave Letterman left, that'd be the end of our late night TV, and then along came Stephen Colbert, and so we go to bed every night to Stephen Colbert. Now, I'm not suggesting that those should be your taste. You may like somebody else, or I always like Oprah and Ellen, and so you like who you like, but that's kind of been my story. So I was intrigued recently that Anderson Cooper, who I enjoy his slant on things, had Stephen Colbert for an hour to do an interview with him. It reminded me of those kind of old interviews that Edward R. Murrow, that is somebody you will remember, used to do with people, or that Walter Cronkite used to do with people. It was like it wasn't meant to be entertaining, it was meant to be insightful. I started watching that, and at the first of it, they talked some about Colbert's politics and Anderson Cooper's politics. It's like we've been down that road so many times, that didn't generate a lot of interest for me. Then they began to talk about how his show had kind of started off in the dumps, and it had then kind of recovered itself, and that now he's the #1 person on late night television, and I knew all of that, so that was not real interesting to me. But I kind of knew where that interview was going to go, and I kept waiting on it to get there, and in about 15 minutes it did, and the last 45 minutes of that interview was really, really provocative for me, and I think if you knew what it was about, it would be for you. One thing that you might not know about Stephen Colbert, he's from around Charleston, South Carolina. His family were Catholic. He was one of 11 children. I'm not sure why anybody would have 11 children, but maybe that's a Catholic sort of thing. But at any rate, and Stephen was the youngest. He had 2 immediately older brothers named Peter and Paul. I'm sure those were good Catholic names. And Stephen probably is. But at any rate, then the rest of his brothers and sisters were at the end of high school or already in college. Some of them already married and having children of their own. So he was kind of the baby of the family. His father was a very prominent doctor. And so they were of means and had the opportunity to support this kind of family and do the kind of things that they did. The father was going on a trip to Canada where he was flying when Stephen was 10, and it was judged that Stephen wasn't quite old enough to go, and that kind of made him mad. And so he stayed home with his mother, and the other two boys went. And they were tragically, all three, the father and the two older brothers, killed in a plane crash. And so that event, obviously, for any 10-year-old would mark their lives for the rest of their lives. Anderson Cooper also lost his father at an early age, just exactly like that. And then the last month or so, Anderson Cooper had lost his mother, Gloria Vanderbilt, that he had been so attached to across all his life. And so here were these two grown men, very successful in their own ways, who began to talk about one of the most common realities of life and how they were dealing with it. They began to talk about grief. And I was deeply drawn into that conversation and want to share with you a little bit that I personally gained from it. First of all, Anderson Cooper asked Stephen Colbert, he said, "You know you are a man of faith." And Stephen Colbert said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "You have a reputation for having lived that faith in a profession where sometimes that's not easy to do." And Colbert said he had really tried to do that it was a very serious part of his life. And so he said, how in your faith, and this is a good question, how in your faith have you dealt with what happened to you when you were 10 years old, the loss of your beloved brothers and your father? How have you dealt with that in relationship to your faith? Stephen Colbert had an answer. He said, "My faith teaches me that even those moments of deepest sorrow are given to us by God as a gift. And that God gives us these moments of deep sorrow so that we can better identify and work with and relate to and comfort those people that we encounter who are in sorrow. That God gives us tragedy so we can help people as they're going through tragedy." That may be right. And I'm not trying to say I'm the expert on many things, much less all things. That may be right. So that is Steve and Colbert's theology. I almost had to hasten to say, as I was sitting there talking to my wife, I disagree with that. And I disagree with that feeling very, very, very strongly. I do not believe that God gives us tragedies. I do not believe that God gives us losses. I do not believe that God, in His majesty and love, would give us anything that is hurtful in that kind of way or in most kinds of ways. I believe life gives us that. I believe that life is like a deck of cards sometimes, and that there is nobody dealing us a particular card in some kind of a predestined way. I believe the cards come out like they are, and sometimes life gives us really good hands to play, and sometimes life gives us very miserable hands to play. I do not think that God gives us suffering. I do not think that God gives us tragedy. I do not believe that God gives us awful things so that we can become stronger. I believe that life, in all of its variables, is fully capable of giving us all of those things. On the other hand, there's almost always a lesson that can be learned from anything that happens to us. And there's almost always something there that can make us better, even the worst things that can happen to us. And so I do agree with the main sentiment that Stephen Colbert and that Anderson Cooper were expressing. When we experience sorrow, and when we experience loss, and when we experience difficulty and pain, I do believe that it's possible that that can make us better at identifying with and then being able to sympathize with and being able to help and extend care for those people that are in the midst of suffering and that are in the midst of pain. The Bible clearly tells us that Jesus was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. We do not know everything that may have given him that acquaintance, but I believe it must have been true. We don't know all of the different kinds of grief that Jesus may have been acquainted with. But isn't it interesting that in all of the jams that these disciples got themselves into, in all of those momentary moments like with Peter's mother or with Mary and Martha and Lazarus, when there were things to be done and he turned aside to help someone. And isn't it really, really significant that when he began to talk about his disciples and the loss that they're going to experience with his leaving, that the very first words out of his mouth is that, don't worry, God's going to send you a comforter. Don't worry, there's going to be comfort that's going to be here. And so I believe very strongly that if we are people that have had sorrow and loss and tragedy and negative things happen in our lives, that may really, really equip us to be comforters. We might rather not have experienced those things, of course. No one would want to experience those things. But could it be that in our extending comfort to others and in our extending help to others, that helps us abridge and mitigate and get beyond the discomfort and the pain that sometimes life presents us with? As we reach out and we are comforters, that may help us in our own need for comfort in our lives. They went on in their conversation, and there was a second thing they talked about. And so Anderson Cooper said to Stephen Colbert, think back if you can to when you were 10 years old and the news came flooding into your family about what had happened to your brothers and what had happened to your father. What was the first kind of response that you had to that? And he thought back through emotions, Stephen Colbert did. And he said, I remember distinctly the first thought that came through my mind. He said, the first thought that I had was that the world didn't seem as safe anymore. He said, I, as a 10-year-old boy, had been raised in a kind of a cocoon. He said, my parents and the people in my school and the people in my community had done everything in the world to make it appear that my world was absolutely safe. And then here comes the news of my father and my brothers out of the clear blue sky. And he said, all of a sudden it dawned on me, the world is not as safe as I thought it was. And then he said, accompanying that was this thought, that my assumptions and my beliefs and the ideas that I had held so easily and so casually, that maybe they weren't as safe as I had thought they were. And Stephen Colbert said, I'm a long way from those events when I was 10 years old. But he said, I still deal daily with the fact that I don't think the world is as safe, and I don't think my assumptions are either. And then Anderson Cooper, extending that point, says, well, how has that made you respond? And he said, oh, I know exactly how it's made me respond. He said, it's given me an acute awareness to want to do everything I can to make the people's lives around me safer. And to do everything I can to try to help make sure that they are safe. And boy, I mean, you can get old and still learn some things about yourself. And I thought, oh my Lord, that brands me. I've always wondered why the safety of my wife, or the safety of my children, the safety of my grandkids, or the people around me have just been overwhelmingly a driver in my life. And that must be it. It must be because if you have a loss like that, if you have a loss of a mother to cancer when you're just a little kid, that maybe the world does seem a little less safe, and your assumptions seem a little less safe. And maybe that causes you to want to go overtime and trying to make other people around you feel safe and be safe. It's not a bad calling to have in life. Not a bad way to be. To understand that life is not real safe sometimes, and that our assumptions are not real safe sometimes. And to try to see if we can pay a little more attention to helping the other people around us be a little safer. And then finally, Anderson Cooper said, does the way you've turned out in life have anything to do with what took place when you were 10 years old? Did that have any impact on your being a comedian? Your brothers and sisters are lawyers and doctors, and all of them have conventional professions and are part of conventional households, yet you turn out to be a comedian. Did those events have anything to do with that? And the first thing out of Stephen Colbert's mouth was, no, I don't think so. And they went on to something else, and then he stopped Anderson Cooper. And he said, wait, let's back up a minute. He said, you've made me think of something I've never even thought of. He said, after those terrible events, all of us watched our mother. And especially me, because I was the one at home with her. And the thing that we began to notice was that here a woman who had been filled with joy and a woman who had been filled with brightness stopped laughing. Those events had muted her laughter. And Stephen Colbert said, as much as I can remember the day the news came about my family, I can remember the day about a year and a half after that when I said something that made my mother laugh. And he said, maybe that did have something to do with it, because I was all the time trying to bring laughter to the people in my family and my mother, who had known such great sadness. I got a younger brother who lives up in Cleveland. And you could ask my wife or anybody that knows him, he should have been a stand-up comedian. He's the funniest boy I've ever seen in all my life. He can come up with angles on funny things that are amazing. He'll call me sometimes and he'll have me laughing until I cry. I'm not sure everything he tells you could talk about in Sunday school class, but he makes you laugh. I began to think when I heard this interview, my dad was incomparably sad with my mother's loss. But my little brother could make him laugh. And he still makes everybody in our family, he still makes us laugh. So you know what I've been thinking this week? We're kind of living at a hard time in our Sunday school class and in our friendship circles. And our numbers are being diminished, and we're losing people that are important to us. And there's likely the prospect that there will be more. I kind of look around sometimes and I wonder who's going to be the last person to leave and turn off the lights behind them. And that's sad. But maybe it tells us what we need to do. Maybe those of us that are acquainted with grief and are people that know about sorrows can understand that that makes us better able to identify and reach out to those people that are in sorrow and grief. Maybe because we do understand that life is not safe, and that sometimes that our assumptions that we make in our lives are not safe, that we can, in the most practical ways possible, try to make sure that people around us are safe. Maybe there's something to be said for that. And then, and I don't mean this in any kind of a facetious way, maybe there are times in which laughter is a good medicine. And maybe sometimes we underestimate when we are able to make people laugh the burdens and the negative energies of life that might in some ways relieve. There's a section of the Old Testament in which God is talking to one of his prophets. And the prophet he's talking to is a guy who doesn't mince words and is ready to get up in the grill of anyone that he considers ungodly, a sinner, unrighteous, willing to get up in the real grill of any of those political leaders that were a part of that world that maybe called God's name but weren't real godly. And God says to the prophet, don't rail a little louder at the injustices that you see out there. That wasn't God's message. Don't get mad at the evil that you see out there. Don't get upset with somebody that's not just doing what they need to do or disagrees with you. God says, comfort ye. Comfort ye my people, says the Lord. And maybe we need to do more of that. And maybe because of what life has given us, we have some gifted capacities to comfort other people that might really be amazing. The kind of comfort that this class extended to people that they love even this week. So let us be people of comfort because we know about sorrow. Let us be people of safety because we know the world's unsafe. Let us be people of laughter because we know that gift that God gives us can be healing as well. Comfort ye. Comfort ye my people, says the Lord of hosts. Let us pray. We're thankful, our Father, for every blessing that you give us. We're thankful most of all for the blessing of lives that have blessed us generously and in ways that will not stop simply because earthly habitation has. We pray that you might bless our friends in their loss. We pray that you might help us, that we might indeed find ways that we can promote comfort in the way that we extend our lives into the lives of others. Go with us and guide us and help us. Help our friends. For we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to say one more thing. When Jimmy and Annalisa were getting ready to leave and talking about taking Steve back to Las Vegas, of course, I told Steve, I said, Steve, you watch out for those showgirls. No, Steve, he said, they'll have to watch out for me. But you know what was the one thing they asked me for? They asked me for all of the information that would allow them to be able to get online and see our videos, Jim. Because they said, Steve and Estelle watch those every week, and that they want to make sure that Steve is able to preserve that connection back to his world and to our class. And so this stuff that we've been doing really does matter to people. We just got to figure out a way that it can matter more. So we'll figure out how to get that information to Annalisa and Jim so that Steve can have that for their lives. In fact, Annalisa said, these people are wonderful. They've been so wonderful to us. She said, I want to be more back connected to them. So I want y'all to know that. Y'all are wonderful people. Thank y'all very much.
A merry heart doing good, like a medicine. A merry heart doing good, like a medicine. A merry heart doing good, like a medicine. But a broken spirit dries the bone. A merry heart doing good, like a medicine. A merry heart doing good, like a medicine. A merry heart doing good, like a medicine. But a broken spirit dries the bone. A merry heart doing good, like a medicine. A merry heart doing good, like a medicine. A merry heart doing good, like a medicine. But a broken spirit, but a broken spirit, but a broken spirit dries the bone. Proverbs